The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Nathan Rothschild didn't just say these words as a boast. He said them as a statement of fact, because by the time he uttered them, his family had already accomplished something unprecedented in human history. They had created the world's first truly multinational bank, an institution that operated across borders, financed wars, toppled governments, and shaped the destiny of nations. The Rothschild story isn't just about wealth. It's about how one family, starting from nothing in a cramped Jewish ghetto, built a financial empire so powerful that kings sought their approval, politicians feared their influence, and entire nations depended on their capital. It's about how money, not armies or crowns, became the real source of power in the modern world. And it's about a strategy so brilliant and so ruthlessly effective that it changed the rules of finance forever. But it's also a story of decline, because the same forces that elevated the Rothschilds, war, nationalism, and political upheaval, would eventually tear their empire apart. What remains today is a fraction of what once was. Yet, even in diminished form, the Rothschild name carries weight. Their legacy shapes our financial system, our political structures, and our understanding of how power actually works. This is the story of how one family learned to control money, and in doing so, learned to control history itself. The story begins not with wealth or power, but with survival. In 1744, Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in Frankfurt's Judengasse, a narrow lane that was less a neighborhood and more a prison. Within its walls lived over 3,000 Jewish residents, crammed into conditions that would be unthinkable today. The Judengasse wasn't just overcrowded, it was designed to be oppressive. Jewish residents couldn't leave at night, they couldn't leave on Sundays or holidays, they were barred from public gardens, coffee shops, and most places Christians frequented. Even basic social interaction was restricted. Groups larger than 2 were forbidden. It was a constant, grinding reminder that they were outsiders in the city they'd lived in for generations. This was the world Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born into. His family expected him to become a rabbi. It was the traditional path for a bright young man from a respectable Jewish family. And, by all accounts, Mayer was on track to fulfill that expectation. But then his parents died, and with their death, his path changed completely. Unable to continue his religious studies, Mayer took an apprenticeship at a banking house. It was meant to be temporary, a way to earn money until he could return to his true calling. But banking suited him. More than that, it fascinated him, particularly one aspect of the business that would prove crucial to his future: rare coins. The banking house dealt in coins from ancient civilizations: Rome, Persia, Byzantium. These weren't just currency, they were collectibles, status symbols coveted by European elites who wanted to display their wealth and sophistication. Mayer learned everything about them: their history, their rarity, their value. And more importantly, he learned who wanted them. By 19, Mayer had gained enough experience to return to Frankfurt and join his father's trading business. He became a dealer in rare coins and found immediate success. Not because the coins themselves were particularly profitable, but because they opened doors. European nobility loved collecting ancient coins, and if you could provide them with rare specimens, you could gain access to their world. This is exactly what happened when Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse noticed Mayer's work. Wilhelm was impressed enough to appoint Mayer as a court factor, a title given to Jewish financiers employed by nobles. For someone from the Judengasse, this was extraordinary. It was a ticket out of the ghetto and into the world of power and money. But Mayer didn't just want to escape poverty. He wanted to build something that would last beyond his lifetime. And he understood something that most people in his position didn't. Geography was risk. If all your wealth and business were in one place, one bad ruler, one pogrom, one political upheaval could destroy everything you'd built. So Mayer sent his 5 sons to 5 different European capitals: Naples, Vienna, Paris, London, and Frankfurt. To each, he gave 2 instructions. First, prioritize doing business with ruling houses, the monarchs and princes who controlled nations. Second, have as many sons as possible to ensure the family business could be passed down and expanded. This wasn't just about expansion, it was about survival through diversification. If one branch faced persecution or political trouble, the others could continue operating. If one nation's economy collapsed, the family would still have income from 4 other countries. It was portfolio diversification applied not just to investments, but to the family itself. By the early 1800s, Mayer's sons had established themselves as the first bank to truly transcend border. They weren't just operating in multiple countries, they were coordinating across them, moving money, information, and influence faster than any government could. And because they financed multiple European powers simultaneously, they occupied a unique position of neutrality. No single government could pressure them too hard without risking their access to capital. This neutrality was illusory, of course. The Rothschilds had interests, and they pursued them ruthlessly. But the appearance of neutrality gave them power. They could play nations against each other, leverage their connections, and influence political decisions without arousing too much suspicion. And then came the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, the conflicts that would transform the Rothschild family from wealthy merchants into the most powerful financial dynasty in the world. Wars are expensive. Armies need to be fed, equipped, and paid. Fortifications need to be built. Alliances need to be secured. And all of this, money. More money than any government typically has on hand. Which means governments need to borrow. And when they borrow, they create opportunities for those willing to lend. The Roth is better than anyone. Between 1792 and 1815, as Europe tore itself apart, the family provided loans to warring princes. They smuggled goods across borders at Napoleon's blockades. They traded wheat, cotton, colonial produce, and weapons, facilitating payments between Britain and the continent, even when official channels were closed. But here's where the strategy becomes fascinating. The Rothschilds didn't just finance one side. They financed both. Jacob Rothschild, based in Paris, provided funding to Napoleon. Nathan Rothschild, operating in London, financed the British war effort under Lord Wellington. This wasn't ideological. It was business. Whoever won, the Rothschilds would be owed money. But as the war progressed, it became clear that Britain's victory would be more profitable. Napoleon's empire was overextended. His finances were precarious. Britain, meanwhile, had access to colonial wealth and could sustain a longer conflict. So Jacob began restricting the funds available to Napoleon, while Nathan increased his support for Britain. In effect, one family was determining the outcome of a continent-wide war, not through military strategy or political maneuvering, but through control of capital. Money decided history, and the Rothschilds controlled the money. Nathan Rothschild understood something else that his competitors didn't. Information is as valuable as capital, maybe more valuable, because if you know something before everyone else, you can act on it, while others are still reacting to old news. So Nathan invested in his own private courier network, fast riders who could deliver information across Europe faster than any government postal service. This network was so efficient that Nathan learned of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo a full day before the British government did. And what did he do with that information? He bought British government bonds. During the war, Britain had issued massive amounts of debt to finance its military. Early in the conflict, when Napoleon was winning battles, panic had driven bond prices down. Nathan had bought heavily at those depressed prices, and when news of Britain's victory reached London, those bonds surged in value. Nathan sold at the peak and made a fortune. This is the moment that cemented the Roth legend. One family, one information network, one brilliantly timed trade, and profits that would dwarf anything they'd made before. But there was a cost. Napoleon had been kind to the Jewish community in France. He'd granted them equal rights and ended centuries of discriminatory laws. For a prominent Jewish family to support his enemies felt, to many French people, like betrayal. French intellectuals began associating the Rothschilds with everything wrong with modern capitalism. Transnationalism, inequality, the erosion of national sovereignty in favor of international finance. This resentment would grow over the decades. The Rothschilds became a symbol, a focal point for anxieties about industrialization, class struggle, and the power of money over politics. And eventually, this sentiment would be exploited by nationalist and anti-Semitic movements, with devastating consequences. But in the immediate aftermath of Waterloo, the Rothschilds were untouchable. Their wealth and influence were staggering, and they were just getting started. After the Napoleonic Wars, Europe entered a period of relative peace and rapid industrialization, and the Rothschilds adapted brilliantly. They shifted focus from wartime financing to peacetime investments. Government securities, insurance, industrial stocks, railways, coal, ironworks, metallurgy. They funded the infrastructure that powered the Industrial Revolution. Railways, in particular, became a Rothschild specialty. The family financed railway construction across Europe, connecting cities, facilitating trade, and generating enormous returns. They weren't just investing in existing projects. They were shaping how and where railways would be built, influencing the economic geography of entire nations. But Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the patriarch who had started it all, knew he wouldn't live forever, and he was obsessed with ensuring his empire survived him. So he left very specific instructions in his will. Only male descendants could inherit the family's wealth, no exceptions. This led to something extraordinary and deeply uncomfortable by modern standards: systematic intermarriage within the family. Between 1824 and 1877, there were 36 marriages among Mayer Rothschild's male descendants. 30 of them were between cousins, first or second. Only 4 Rothschild women and 2 men married outside the family. This wasn't about tradition or religion. It was about consolidation. Every marriage outside the family was a potential leak of wealth and influence. By marrying within the family, the Rothschilds kept everything concentrated, controlled, and coordinated. There was another element to Mayer's strategy that proved even more important: liquidity. The Rothschilds didn't tie their wealth to tangible assets like real estate or physical gold stores that could be seized. Instead, they invested in stocks, bonds, and debts. Highly liquid instruments that could be moved, hidden, or sold quickly if necessary. This was brilliant foresight. Anti-Semitic violence was common in 19th century Europe. Mobs would attack Jewish communities, destroying property and seizing assets. But if your wealth is in bonds held in multiple banks across multiple countries, there's nothing for a mob to destroy. If a government turns hostile, you can liquidate and move your capital before they can act. This strategy of liquidity and geographic diversification made the Rothschilds nearly impossible to destroy. They weren't dependent on any single government, any single asset class, or any single location. They were everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, and this made them more powerful than kings. Of Mayer's 5 sons, Nathan Rothschild in London proved the most brilliant. While his brothers managed successful operations in their respective cities, Nathan operated on another level. He didn't just react to opportunities, he created them. In 1835, Nathan secured the rights to mercury mines in Spain. This might sound like a minor business deal, but it was anything but. Mercury was essential for refining gold and silver. By controlling most of the world's mercury supply, the Rothschilds gained indirect control over precious metal production globally. It was a monopoly on a critical industrial input, one of the most valuable positions you can hold in any economy. Nathan also built relationships with the most powerful institutions in Britain. He secured the rights to refine gold and silver for the Bank of England and the Royal Mint. This wasn't just profitable, it was symbolic. The family that had started in a ghetto now controlled the literal production of British money. The wealth generated wasn't wasted on luxury, though the Rothschilds lived well. It was reinvested systematically. The family expanded into global trade, particularly oil and non-ferrous metals. They became the largest shareholders in companies like Rio Tinto and De Beers, and later Royal Dutch Shell. These weren't passive investments. The Rothschilds influenced how these companies operated, where they expanded, and how they interacted with government. By the mid-1800s, the family's wealth and influence were almost beyond comprehension. They wielded power across continents and industries, and critically, entire nations depended on them. When France was defeated by Prussia in 1871, it was the Rothschilds who provided two massive loans to keep the French government afloat. When Britain wanted to become the principal shareholder in the Suez Canal Company, it was the Rothschilds who provided £4 million on short notice. That investment made the Suez Canal a critical British asset, reducing voyage time from London to India from weeks to days and supercharging British trade. The Rothschilds also funded the scramble for Africa. They financed individuals like Cecil Rhodes, whose diamond operations in southern Africa made him fabulously wealthy, and helped the Rothschild-controlled De Beers Company dominate the global diamond market. In the United States, the family supported American industrialists, including the Rockefeller. The Rothschilds owned a governing share in the National City Bank of Cleveland, through which they provided crucial financing to John D. Rockefeller as he consolidated the oil refinery business. This support was instrumental in the formation and expansion of Standard Oil, which made Rockefeller one of the richest people in history. There's even a theory, though debated, that Rothschild influence played a role in the Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which Britain expressed support for the establishment of a Jewish state. The declaration was addressed to Lionel Walter Rothschild as a figurehead of the British Jewish community. What is certain is that the family donated heavily to Jewish settlement efforts in Palestine for decades, providing substantial support to the movement that eventually led to the establishment of Israel in 1948. The Rothschilds were also deeply engaged in philanthropy. In Frankfurt alone, they managed 30 charitable foundations, including libraries, orphanages, hospitals, homes for the elderly, and educational funds. This wasn't just altruism, it was reputation management. By positioning themselves as benefactors, they softened the public perception of their enormous power. And that power was recognized at the highest levels. Mayer's 5 sons all became barons of the Austrian Empire. A Rothschild was the first Jewish person to enter the British Parliament. Another was the first elevated to British peerage. The head of the British branch was often regarded as the unofficial leader of British Jewry. For a while, it seemed like the Rothschild empire would last forever. But empires, even financial ones, don't last forever. And the forces that elevated the Rothschilds would eventually tear them down. The first crack appeared in 1863, when the Naples branch closed. The trouble began when Italian nationalists under Giuseppe Garibaldi captured Naples in 1860. The new Italian government viewed the Rothschilds' international ties with suspicion. Within 3 years of Italy's unification, the family was forced to close all operations in Naples. Next was the Frankfurt branch, the original seat of the family's power. Ironically, it wasn't politics that killed it. It was demographics. The Frankfurt branch lacked male heirs and was forced to close in 1901, a victim of the very inheritance rules Mayer had established. But the Vienna branch suffered the most tragic fate. With the rise of the Nazis and their takeover of Austria, the Rothschilds became targets. Family members were forced to flee. Those who remained, like Baron Louis Nathaniel de Rothschild, were imprisoned, and only released after enormous ransoms were paid. All their possessions, homes, businesses, artworks were seized. The German and French branches faced similar persecution. The Vichy government in occupied France confiscated Rothschild properties during World War II. Miraculously, the Paris Bank survived the war. But it didn't survive French politics. Under a socialist government, the bank was nationalized in 1982, effectively ending the Rothschild presence in Paris banking. By the late 20th century, only the London branch remained of the original 5. The empire that had once spanned continents had been reduced to a single operation in Britain. Wars, nationalism, anti-Semitism, and political upheaval had accomplished what economic competition never could. They had broken the Rothschild network. But even in decline, the family adapted. In 2008, Rothschild family holdings were reorganized under a single company, marking the first time in nearly 2 centuries that the family's businesses were unified. Today, their holdings span financial services, real estate, mining, energy, and charitable work. They own more than 24 wineries worldwide. One of the banks, founded by Nathan Rothschild, still operates and reports healthy financials. In 2022, it reported $3.2 billion in revenue and $650 million in net income, with $109 billion in assets under management. The family's combined holdings are estimated at $1.2 trillion. They remain one of the world's richest families. But their influence is nothing like it once was. They don't finance wars anymore. They don't dictate government policy. They don't control the money supply of empires. The world has changed. Finance has become institutionalized, regulated, transparent in ways that would have been unimaginable in the 19th century. The kind of power the Rothschilds wielded, operating across borders with minimal oversight, coordinating national policies through personal relationships, is no longer possible. Yet their legacy remains. The Rothschilds proved that finance could be armies. They demonstrated that information is as valuable as capital. They showed that diversification and liquidity are the keys to survival in an unstable world. And they established the template for multinational banking that every major financial institution still follows today. The story of the Rothschilds is a reminder that power is never permanent. The same forces that elevate you can destroy you. Geography, politics, nationalism, war. These shape history more than any individual family, no matter how wealthy or influential. The Rothschilds rose because they understood the world they lived in and positioned themselves brilliantly within it. They fell because the world changed, and they couldn't adapt fast enough. But perhaps the most important lesson is this. The Rothschild empire was built on a single, seemingly minor event. If Mayer Amschel Rothschild's parents hadn't died when he was young, he would never have entered finance. He would have become a rabbi, as his family intended, and the entire course of European history might have been different. Britain's victory over Napoleon, the financing of the Industrial Revolution, the scramble for Africa, the rise of Standard Oil, even the establishment of Israel. All of these were influenced, directly or indirectly, by a family that started with nothing in a Frankfurt ghetto. One family, 5 sons, 5 cities. And a strategy so effective, it changed the world. The Rothschilds didn't just accumulate wealth. They weaponized it. They turned money into power, information into profit, and geography into insurance. And in doing so, they proved something that politicians and generals have always known but rarely admit. In the modern world, whoever controls the money controls everything else. Nathan Rothschild said it himself, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England." He knew that money, not monarchy, was the real source of power. And for over a century, his family controlled that money. Kings and presidents came and went, but the Rothschilds remained. Until they didn't. History has the answers. And the Rothschild story teaches us that no empire lasts forever. But the lessons from how they rise and fall echo through every financial crisis, every shift in global power, and every attempt to control the flow of capital. The players change. The game remains the same.